You're listening to Widowed AF with
Rosie Gilmoss
and Lucinda Boast.
We've invited some members of the world's most exclusive club to bravely share their stories.
Join us for some honest conversations about living a different life, the crushing lows, the surprising highs, and everything in between.
Please note this is a podcast about death. Carefully read the episode descriptions and be kind to yourself.
But for now, welcome to our podcast.
Let's begin. All right, welcome back, everybody. You are listening to Widowed AF, and you've got me here with Lulu, and we also have a very special guest all the way from across the pond. I'd like to welcome Anthony Del Broccolo, all the way from LA. Hello, Anthony.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
You are in LA.
I am in LA. Burbank, technically, but yes,
yeah.
Los Angeles.
Close
yeah,
enough,
close
right,
enough.
for us? Yeah. You guys all think we know each other anyway, so... So, Anthony and I have known each other for quite some time because we are both members of this American support group, which I've mentioned in the past, called the Hot Young Widows Club. Although we're now the moderately attractive, middle-aged, something like we changed the name to make it move with the times, as it were.
The group formerly known as Hot Young Widows Club or something like that. Yes.
Yes. And our timelines are quite similar, aren't they? Because Ben died in the March and your wife, Courtney, died in the June of 2018. Correct. I'm going to let you, if you would, tell us in your own words how you ended up here, please.
Yeah, so Courtney and I decided to have a second child, and we already had a daughter named Darby, and Courtney was due to give birth on June 17th. So we drove to the hospital feeling pretty happy, excited about everything. The experience in the hospital was going okay. She had an epidural at about midnight on the 18th. And then the doctor came in at about 6:30 in the morning and said, everything looks like it's going okay. I'll come back in about 2 hours. My office is down the road, and I'll check in again, and then we should be ready to start pushing. And then about 10 minutes later, all the alarms started going off on Courtney's, hospital bed and apparatus. And pretty much every nurse came in, every doctor in the hospital came in. So I knew something was bad. Something bad was going on. And she was sort of unconscious at that point. They then wheeled her out because they had to do an emergency C-section to get Bobby out. And what happens when they do an emergency C-section is they put the father in scrubs and they bring you into the OR to kind of watch what's happening. And they started to do that. They wheeled Courtney out, but even as that was happening, the alarms were still going crazy. And after about 5 minutes, they came to me and they said, "You're not coming in." And I knew that was another sign that things weren't going well. They then brought me to the neonatal area and they put me in a room, and a doctor came in and said, "We have to be honest, Courtney's not responding and Bobby is having some trouble as we're completing the C-section." And they took him out and they do what's called, I forget the name of the score, but they start testing newborns to see how they're responding. And he had a very low score, meaning he wasn't getting a lot of oxygen. And they said, so we're going to concentrate on getting him up to speed. And they said, and we're going to be upfront, it doesn't look like your wife is going to make it. At that point, I was alone in the hospital. Courtney's parents were at the house watching Darby with the nanny, actually. We have a nanny named Cricket. And they brought me in another room and they brought in a doctor, but they also brought in the hospital chaplain. And that's kind of when I knew it was a good outcome.
Yeah.
And after about maybe 10 more minutes, they said they weren't able to save Courtney, but they were able to get Bobby's scores up. So things were improving on that. But I couldn't even focus on that at that point. I was just consumed with the fact that, we went to the hospital for this happy reason, and then Courtney didn't make it. And, so many things went through my mind at that point. One was what I was gonna tell my daughter, who was in preschool at the time,
Yeah.
but also the fact that, Courtney carried Bobby for 9 months and really didn't get to see him. Eventually, my in-laws arrived, and they were with me in the hospital, and my parents were flying from the East Coast. They were already coming a few days later, but they decided to obviously accelerate the trip
Yeah.
because of what happened. So they decided to work on Bobby in the neonatal unit at the one hospital we were at. But when I went home to talk to Darby to tell her what happened, in the middle of trying to explain what happened, I got a call from the hospital saying I had to sign off, on a transfer for Bobby to go to Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, which is a specialized children's hospital, which is wonderful. And they really, I credit them with saving the rest of our family's life. They gave Bobby the best care possible. But it was a weird thing. Like I had to go back and between talking to my daughter, telling my in-laws what was going on, telling my parents, and dealing with the transfer of Bobby to this hospital. So I came home, driving home, I didn't know what I was going to say to my daughter. So I actually called my therapist and asked him for some words, and I told him what I was thinking of saying, and he gave me he said I was on the right track. So the kind of heartbreaking thing was when I came through the door, Darby was only 4 at the time, was very excited to see me and wanted to play hide and seek. So I wound up playing a game of hide and seek with her before
Mm.
telling her what happened.
It's a friend of mine, actually, her husband died last year very suddenly. And one of the things she said to me is how strangely her youngest child had reacted. He's the same age as Tabby is
Yeah,
now. And I said to her, I know, right? I told the boys, I mean, obviously, Tabby was far too young. I told the boys, and Monty made this horrific noise, and Hector sort of copied what his brother did. And then I kid you not, I turned around like 5 minutes later and they're in Harry Potter
yeah,
costumes with swords. Like nothing happened. It has to be a sort of prime evil defense mechanism. It has to
yeah.
be,
I
doesn't
think it
it?
absolutely has to be. And one of the things that I did, which I was proud of myself for, and also proud of my friends for helping me, they got me hooked up with a child grief counselor. And
Yeah.
one of the things she said to this point was that young children, especially 4 years old, can talk about it, but only for very short periods of time, and then they have to move on to the next thing. So Harry Potter costumes, hide and seek, whatever it is,
Yeah.
they and you're right, it is self-protection.
And if you haven't got somebody that is in that sort of position of expert, as it were, to tell you this, you think that your kids are
Yeah,
psychopaths. Like
absolutely.
and so many widows and widowers, I use the word widow to refer to men as well, have talked about this. And it's, again, it's one of those weird kind of secrets of loss that nobody talks about. And I suppose, perhaps it's something that none of our peers have experienced, a significant loss of this magnitude for a child. So, but yeah, it does seem almost universal that this happens sort of under the age of about 6 or 7, that they do this weird sort of compartmentalization. But yeah, I think you're right. It is, they can't process that much
No, it's
information.
it's too much at one time. And also, and I'm sure you guys went through this too. It's there. One of the things with my kids and with the world in general was a general, almost like resentment that people weren't feeling the same way I was feeling about this. Like,
Yeah.
you want your kid it's silly, but you want your daughter to be very upset because she just lost her mom. And in the moment,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
So, and I remember even taking it off my family for a second. The next day I had to go to the bank, and I was walking through somewhere in Los Angeles to go to a bank, and it was sunny out and people were having a great time. And I remember being so resentful that they didn't know what was happening to me.
Yeah. How dare
Right.
they, right? How dare they just carry
Yes.
on? Absolutely. Yeah, I remember this as well. And that kind of having to just, your world has just imploded. You're left, you went to the hospital expecting to come home as a family of
Yep.
4. You've left on your own.
Yep.
Your baby is in serious,
Yes.
having serious medical intervention, and your wife has
Yes.
died. Like, I know your story, and it still brings all the hairs on my, even hearing it, because what should have been, as you say it yourself, what should have been such a joyous, wonderful occasion ended in the most horrific way. And even then, you've got to then call Courtney's parents, and instead of saying you have a grandson, you have to say, "Well, you have a grandson, but
But you lost your
I
daughter,
told."
yeah. And that was a thing, like a theme that came out of like that started day one, and I'm sure you guys experience this too, is you wind up spending a lot of time managing other people's grief too. Like, and I wanted to help my in-laws through losing their daughter. So that part was okay, but, just as simple as calling health insurance to get some detail sorted out and talking to a woman on the line, and she'll say what happened, and you explain the story, and she starts crying, and then suddenly you're like, "No, it's a," I'm mad.
Yeah. You end up
Yeah,
comforting them,
yeah,
don't you? I don't know whether you've heard Lulu's episode, Anthony, but when she drops that clanger on people, that's quite the
yeah,
surprise.
Oh God,
yes,
yeah. Oh, I can relate so much to this. So many phone calls where John's death was so unexpected, having to kind of counsel people
yeah.
through the story when I was still processing it myself was huge.
It's a very, I think, often unspoken part of losing someone.
Yeah, and even we talked about at the school run and things, me sort of not wanting to say that my husband left my children. I feel very strongly that he did not walk out on us.
Yes,
So I then end up blurting out this very, what to me is become almost a script
absolutely.
that so I can tell people in a very efficient way what happened. Now you see, you'll just be able to go listen to episode whatever this is, Widowed AF, and
Right.
people can hear your story
Yeah,
now. But you sanitize it because and also you then don't want people getting upset, because then you kind of look like a robot unless you cry, and who wants to be crying every time
yeah.
you speak? Yeah, it's really easy.
Well, I'll share with you a kind of like a darkly comic side of this is that
Please do.
I for a living, I write comedy for TV. So I write for different sitcoms, and
Would you please drop those names for
sure,
us?
I wrote for 8 seasons on The Big Bang Theory, and then I wrote for another CBS sitcom called The United States of Al, and I just started on the reboot of King of the Hill, which was on Fox and will be on Hulu coming up.
Yeah, you've given me quite the status with my teenage son,
Oh,
actually. So thank you very much.
I'm glad for that.
But now,
I'm glad.
sorry, we digress.
Yeah. No,
I'm
no,
so
no.
sorry.
So Big Bang Theory ended in 2019. So Courtney, died in 2018. And by the way, everyone I worked with was incredible. They gave me as much paternity leave as I wanted, and the leave after losing my wife, all of that stuff. They were great. But the show ended, and then I had to start reestablishing my career, pitching new shows, and I would go around on these meetings and meet with different producers in town, and they're comedy meetings, and I'm supposed to make them laugh in the meeting. I had probably 3 meetings where I had the producers crying by the end because I explained to them what just happened to me.
Why you've been
Yeah,
on? Yeah.
exactly. So, it was like the weirdness of going in to try to impress people with being funny and having them cry instead. So,
Did it get you work?
and sometimes, yeah, it did. It did.
Well, like my bin men to take my bin out for
Yeah,
me.
exactly,
We've got to take the wins where you get them.
It differentiated me from the funny comedy writers, which, I was
There you go. There you go. Everybody's got to have
I
their
was
own
the
story.
sad one. Yeah.
When I was reading this very, very beautifully written blog that you did, you wrote a letter to Courtney, didn't you? Was it about 3 months after she died? And I read it early on when we first became friends. I read it again in preparation for this, and I kind of didn't remember it all, and I can only assume that because I was so self-absorbed with my own grief at the time, I didn't realize, for example, that Bobby had been so poorly. And just rereading it, the love that you had and presumably still do for your wife, because we very much know that the love doesn't die. And it's that you describe her in one paragraph as a celestial body, and I just think, what a way to be described. And there's a real power in those words of the impact that she had on, as you say yourself, and the rest of the world. And I think you've honoured her very beautifully in the way you've written to her here, and it's very much what we're about here, isn't it? It's about putting those emotions out there and publicly saying what you very much wish you could say to
Yeah,
them.
thank you for that. Yeah, and it believe it or not, it was actually pretty easy just because of how powerful she was, in our family's life, in my life, and how she continues to be.
Oh,
We
Yeah. I never met Courtney and I've never met Darby in person, but I've seen many photos and videos of her, and it must be like almost looking at a miniature version of Courtney. They look to me anyway, like almost
she is
identical.
such a mini
That
Courtney.
must come with both pleasure and pain, It must bring you joy to see her looking back at you, but it's difficult
It
as
is
well.
very bittersweet, absolutely. But I would say, especially as the years go on, more joyful than sad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we feel that very much actually. You catch a glimpse of them as they turn ahead. My eldest looks very much like his dad, and it can catch your breath a little bit, but most of the time it does make you
yeah,
smile.
and she's very
And
dramatic like her mom, and
I was like,
she will come she will her mom was Courtney was an actress, and Darby will come through the door sometimes and just start imitating kids at school or teachers and go into this thing, and I am looking at Courtney. I am talking to Courtney. It's incredible.
and that's beautiful, by the way.
Mhm.
I love that. And also, I have a very dramatic daughter of my own,
I've
as you
seen it.
know.
I love
So
the
at
pictures.
some
Yeah.
point, you need to get these girls in a
Yep.
room. I don't know whether I want to be in there with them. Glitter explosion. And what about Bobby? Because obviously Tabby's dad died when she was 6 months old, so it is not the same loss, but it's in similar in that they don't know the person that they lost. They all they have are kind of learnt memories and photos. So how do you navigate that with him, because he's getting to an age now where he must start having
It's
questions?
exactly what's happening. Actually, the questions probably started about 6 months ago, and it's been an interesting and difficult experience. He's great. So he's very inquisitive and wants to know about Courtney, but also similarly to Darby at that age, because he's about the age Darby was when she found out, he can only talk about it for so long before he's out.
Yeah.
But we have an interesting situation because our nanny Cricket, who was in place when Bobby was born, it was kind of a godsend to me. She moved into our garage
Ah,
apartment that is behind our house when Bobby was born and Courtney died. And she said she was trained as a night nurse. So she said, let me take
yeah.
Bobby at night while you take Darby and do all of that. So it that saved my life and everyone's life. And she was able to help sleep train Bobby and just so she's become, for lack of a better term, a second mom, especially to Bobby.
Yeah. A maternal figure.
So, but I mean, I will be very honest with you. It has created some difficult moments for me. One morning we were getting ready for school and Bobby was saying, I love you, Daddy. And I said, oh, that's sweet. He said, I love Grandma Ellen. I love Grandpa Roger. I love Darby. He said, I love Cricket. And he said, but I don't love Mommy. And I
Oh,
oh, sweetie, why don't you love mommy? And he said, well, because she's gone and she's not here. And I said, she wants to be here. She wanted to be here and she's still in our hearts, but she couldn't. And then he kind of let that go. And then a couple of days later, he drew a picture and it was a woman, or as much as a 4-year-old can draw of a of a woman, and with something in her belly. And I said, "What's this, Bobby?" And he said, "It's me in Cricket's belly." So
oh,
he has identified so much with Cricket, obviously, that he said, I wish Cricket had me instead of mommy." So it's a very difficult
mm.
topic to navigate.
And those are incredibly painful words to hear,
They
aren't
are.
they? Because that must feel like she's being kind of erased from his mind. And of course, that's not the case. And it's just a 4-year-old that can't, they can't, if it's not immediately in front of
Exactly.
them, they can't see it at all, can they? But yeah, even just hearing words like that, I know that Hector has autism. He asks me very, very direct questions, and he always has really, and it will be things like, "Did a shark eat Daddy's body?" or what happens to bodies when they're in the water? And very sort of questions I want no part of, if I'm honest, but you have to kind of put your own discomforts to one side and answer. And that does lead me to the question of how does he know how his mum died? And does he know that it was having him? Because that must be very
Yes,
challenging.
so that's another, the kind of the ultimately difficult layer of complication to all of this. She died while giving birth to him. And
Mm.
one of the things I did is when we had Courtney cremated and we got a family kind of place at the cemetery, and for her plaque I purposely left off the date of death. I just put the years because I didn't want him to see his birthday. You know, I
Oh
just
my God, that really got me. That has. Sorry,
no, it's
that's
okay.
I don't know
Okay.
why that really got me.
Um,
Oh,
but he's been starting to ask those questions, like, and he's and even though he said that thing earlier about I wish cricket had me, he's also been really interested in his mommy and asking a lot of questions about her. So that's also, there's good with it too. And he was like, "What was it like when I was in mommy's belly?" And we tell him that, Courtney used to show me when he was kicking and he kicked a lot and he likes trying to imitate that. And so I've been talking with the same grief counselor that helped Darby when she was a baby, and I kind of have separate sessions with her about how to talk to Bobby and explain what happened. And you can't lie. That's one of the things I've learned in grief counseling, and I think especially in America, I don't know if this is true in other countries, but we're kind of like trained to be speaking euphemisms, like
yeah. Passed away,
away.
went
I
to
mean, she should
sleep.
be
Yeah.
died. So she's been helping me with more direct language and also to not make it seem like it was his fault. 'Cause it was
Yeah, and that's
it wasn't.
because
And that I didn't get into that too much, but there was a long stretch, probably a month, where I didn't even know from the doctors exactly what happened. They were giving me conflicting answers, and the eventual back and forth and through a lot of testing, it was determined that Courtney had an amniotic fluid embolism, which is a really rare and kind of fluky thing.
I hadn't heard of this until I looked at the comments on your
Yeah,
blog.
yeah. So, and I don't know. How do you explain that to a 4-year-old? It's hard enough explaining that to one of us. So I just kind of have to talk about it and say, her body stopped working, but it was after you were born and that kind of thing. And
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that, is it just not ever wanting them to feel in any way that they had any responsibility?
no,
Because even my kids, they say, "Oh, I wish," Hector said to you, "I wish I could build a time machine," and I would go back. He said, "But I wouldn't go back to the day Daddy died. I'd go back to the day
mhm,
before, and I would say to him, 'Don't go diving.'" And you think, "Oh my God, this is all in their little
I know.
heads," but they haven't got the vocabulary to
You know,
articulate it. It's poor little buggers, really.
and yeah, I feel truly awful for them for so many reasons, but because one of the things is even though no matter how far I go out of my way to explain to him that it wasn't his fault, it's almost inevitable that a human being by nature will link the two events
Yeah.
and have feelings about that. So,
Especially those sort of angsty teenage years as
yeah.
well, where you're sort of looking for this kind of inward self-blaming thing, aren't you? But I don't doubt for a second with you in his corner, he's going to be all
Oh,
right.
thank you.
Both of them are, because yeah, and it is. There's an extra layer with a dad as well. And I obviously, from being with John, I know this from talking to him, and it's that whole. And I don't know whether having cricket sort of navigated this for you, but of course, if you're a dad on your own with a daughter, who's letting their little girls come round and play? And it's it adds that kind of extra kind of isolation, and that, like, you're the freaky troll that nobody wants
Right.
around. So for men, it is different. And I know John never liked really sort of being told that he was doing amazingly, because he's like, it's just what dads do, it just the same as mums. But I think it perhaps makes you that even more isolated than the women feel in that situation. Because, and as I'm sure you know yourself, men aren't always very good at talking about their feelings either.
Well, it seems like Jonathan is the right guy to have around because he seems like he's doing an amazing job. But it's really interesting timing that you talk about this because Darby is 8 and Cricket and I had a discussion about, you know, puberty and how do we
Oh, yeah.
navigate that, right? I mean, like, I wouldn't I'm not a girl, you know? So I
Yeah.
don't know how to talk about those issues that well, but Cricket went through it. So in that way, I feel extremely lucky to have a woman around who can talk about that.
Yeah.
And just today, we FaceTimed with my mom, and Darby had some questions about what it was like to go through puberty in the 1950s. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so we have our little village that is doing we're doing our best. But it's those moments where I feel especially deficient. I mean, I'm glad I have, the family. So I'll give you another story that really illustrates this to me. It was
Please do.
what made me feel like I was not enough. And I did my best, but it was last October. My father-in-law was having a family celebration of Courtney's life in Maine. So my father-in-law also went through a lot of loss the past 4 years. In addition to his daughter, his wife, my mother-in-law, passed away, and his two parents died. So
Oh,
yeah,
bloody
it's like
hell.
4 people in the span of 2 years. I honestly don't know how he does it, but I mean, people say that about us, and we're doing it. So anyway, I had to fly.
To have the luxury of
Yeah,
choice, eh?
exactly. You don't have the choice. So I flew with Darby from LA to Maine, which is not a direct flight. So there was a lot of, stopping and waiting in airports. And it was still, COVID was kind of still strong. So it was masks and a lot of extra stuff. We got to Maine and we were in a cabin with my father-in-law and his family. And in the middle of the night, Darby got up and said her stomach was feeling bad and then her throat was really tight. So we went into the bathroom and I sat with her and she still wasn't feeling good. We got on the plane to fly back and she was just miserable physically. And we got stuck in Atlanta for like 5 hours and the plane kept getting delayed and she was feeling really sick. And I just kept thinking like Courtney would be so much better in this situation than me. She needs her mom, you
Oh,
know?
no.
She needs
Yeah, and it comes up, doesn't it? Time and time again, you think that you have just got yourself to a point where you've got your shit
Yeah,
together and you're managing and, you've got work and you've got parenting and you're starting to get social life, and then something happens and you just think, "Oh," Monty got an award at school,
yeah,
it was quite a big deal, and he was one of the top performing kids in his year, and I went with my mum, and I thought, that's he should be here. He should be celebrating the wins, and you can't help yourself but project forward to wedding days, and they may never get married. You can't think like that, but you do, don't you?
yeah,
And even very early on, I used to think about stuff like
yep.
that.
And that's been really hammered home to me with Bobby because Bobby is now at an age where he's hitting all the milestones, like the first words, reading on his own, graduating from preschool, and like I feel like Courtney's being robbed of all of that. And
Yeah. And she
she's
is. She has been robbed, and he's been
and
robbed.
she carried him for 9 months, and it just seems so unfair. And obviously that's true with Darby too. Darby's
Yeah.
she's performing in her first musical, and Courtney was an actress in musical theater, and her not getting to see that is tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and it is so, excuse my language, but it's fucking unfair because you all deserve to have her around, and she deserved to see these beautiful humans that she created and the man that she loved, live into old age. And I'm really, really
Oh,
sorry that you didn't get that happy ever after. I
thank
am.
you. I'm sorry.
Are you able to tell us? I know it's
Yeah,
this is the shit club, isn't it? Nobody wants to be here, but we're all in here
yeah.
together, supporting each other through it, and that's what matters, isn't it? That's when you see the humanity. What does life look like for you guys now?
It is mostly good. Actually, mostly very positive. Like the kids are thriving.
Wonderful.
Darby's doing great at school. She's just like her mom. She's super competitive, a go-getter, does anything and everything. Like she does a little bit of music, she does a little bit of art. She loves soccer. She's obsessed with soccer now. Bobby is really funny and really active. And, you know, it's a little different because I do have a live-in nanny, which a lot of people don't have that luxury, and I understand that, so I'm pretty lucky in that regard, very lucky in that regard, and as are
But you also have a demanding
I
job as
do,
well. You
yeah.
don't sell yourself
So
short.
that
You can't do
and
it.
that is tricky in 2 different ways. So, when I'm on a show and I'm on a writing staff, you know, I'm gone from 9 o'clock in the morning until sometimes 7 o'clock at night, sometimes much later. So that's hard. And then to come home on the weekends and the kids just wanna play with me the whole time, and that's, you know, and sometimes it's just I'm out of breath
Yeah,
from that.
yeah.
The converse of that is when I'm out of work, and not out of work, but, you know, developing my own
We won't do a whip
yeah,
round yet.
developing my own stuff and writing on my own. I'm writing from home, so if I'm upstairs in the office and I so much as go to use the bathroom, I can hear "Daddy," and Bobby comes running up and he wants to play, you know, so it's a challenge as far as that goes.
Well, we normally record when the kids are at school, but due to the time difference, it's 8 well, it was 8 o'clock when we started recording
Yeah,
here, and had to dish out some quite heavy bribes and
yeah,
threats. So they all stay in their rooms. Don't
exactly,
come in this room.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, it's been so lovely to talk to you. I could probably ask you a million more questions, but I, I
Please.
think we
You
probably need some time to process that. You've been really, really generous with your honesty and with your
oh,
time today. So thank
sure, of
you.
course. Is there
And
anything else you wanted to ask?
I don't think so at the moment. Are you dating anybody? Do you want to tell us that?
I have
I do like to ask.
I have just started to explore the dating apps.
Oh
Yeah,
God. Godspeed.
thank you. I had tried about maybe a year and a half out, and I just wasn't ready.
You come to it in your own time, don't you?
Yeah,
There's some never do, some do very quickly, some in their own sweet time. But I wish you and that wonderful family of yours that you are raising so honorably and so beautifully. I wish you all the happiness in the
sounds
world
good.
because my God, you deserve it. And I look forward to watching King of the Hill and
Oh,
reliving my
good. Oh,
youth
great.
again. Thanks for bringing that back into my
Of
life.
course, my pleasure. I'm part of a team, part of a big team.
Well, aren't we all? Aren't we
Yeah.
all? Well, thank you ever so
Yeah, thank
much.
you
It
guys. I
really
really
much
appreciate it.
appreciated.
This is a really great thing you're doing for the widow community, and anyone who's experienced loss, I think, can find some universality in what you're doing. So, thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Thank you so much, Anthony.
Thank you for listening today. We'll be back with you soon for more from the front line of loss.
But for now, as you were.